So the last we left off, Pong looks like this. Your program might differ a bit, but essentially it's the same thing. What do we have are our imports at the top. Pygame init is run. We have our main where we have a couple of variables that we're going to use, like the width of the screen, the height of the screen, and the color white. Set the caption of the Pygame window to be equal to the word Pong, which is the bar at the top of the Pygame window. And then we create our screen. And then here we have our variables for the right paddle, I believe it is. And here we have the variables for our left paddle. And then here we have our variables for the ball. Entering into the game loop, this is the game loop here. We are reading in our keystrokes. Once we have that done, we have the logic that is repositioning our left and right paddles, and the logic that is repositioning not repositioning, but resetting the X and Y value for the ball, and also the X and Y value for the paddle up here. And once that's all finished, then we just have a couple more things to do. We need to blit everything onto the screen at their new locations. Right? For the paddle, we're using X and Y, and for the ball, we're using the ball rect. And then the last step is just to flip it to the screen or burn it to the screen, and then we repeat that process over and over and over again. And what we have is a game that looks like, whoa, shoot. So what we have is a game that looks like this, right? So we have a ball bouncing off the paddles. And when we're going through the tutorial, the next step, well, this is our end result, what we want, but the first step that you want to do to objectifying the Pong game is to create a paddle class. And something that has recently come to my mind is a good way to describe a class is just a bag of variables. Okay? And so if you look at the paddle, right, here is our right paddle, and here's our left paddle. You can see that they both have the same set of variables, right? They both have an X and a Y. They have a speed, a width, a height. They have a surface, right? Some kind of an image variable that contains the surface of the paddle, and then we have move up and move down. So when we create our paddle class, those variables that we use to describe the paddle are going to be the instance variables in our paddle class. So we come over here and we say class paddle self. Ooh, I might be wrong here. Class paddle, okay, no self. And it's probably best when you do this to type in the code yourself, because when you copy and paste, it like adds invisible characters sometimes that can be hard to track down. And then our paddle class is going to be pretty simple. All we're going to have is a def init, and the def init is going to have a set of variables, and we're also going to have def what is this, update, right? And the update is going to contain the logic that we need to reset the paddle's position. So if I go ahead and save that, and you can notice we have an underline gray line here, and what it says is that there's no init method. Well, I thought I wrote the init method. It's right here, but we need to put the 2 underscores in there, right? Because remember, init is a special method that runs automatically when you create a paddle class. And then here we have another gray line, and this tells us about style errors, right? And so here the compiler is expecting 2 lines in between the class definition and the function definition. So let's go ahead and put 2 blank lines in there, and you can see the underline gray goes away. And then I go ahead and run it, and everything works fine, right? And this is incremental development. So what is incremental development? It means just program a little bit of it, make sure it works. Program a little bit of it, and make sure it works. If you don't do that, then what you're going to end up with are 10 errors that you need to track down, and you're not sure where each of them are because you've been programming up and down your program. So by incrementally developing, you know exactly where the error is, you know which line that you need to look at and focus on, and it's much easier process to code. So we did that, and of course pass means I don't want to define this method yet, but I still want it to compile. And so if you want to do that, you could put pass. And a good place to put this is if you have a branch statement, like a 3 or 4 branch conditional statement, and you want to program the first one, but you don't want to program the rest of the 3, well, you could put pass here, and then run it and test it and see that it works, just like we did here. So I put pass and we're ready to go, and I guess a good thing to do now is to create the instance variables for the paddle class. And what we're going to do is we're just going to take all the variables for the left paddle, and I'm just going to go ahead and paste it in here, and we're going to put self right on all of them. So I'm going to put self period, and copy that, paste it here, 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 and I don't think we need these guys, so I'm going to leave them here actually. So the move up and move down, they are game variables that your for loop needs, so we're going to leave them down here. Okay. And then now we don't need x1 and y1 and x2 and y2, or paddle height 1 or paddle height 2, because when we create a paddle, it's going to make all of these instance variables and put it into our bag of variables. So when we make our left paddle, we're going to get a bag, name it left paddle, and then when we create our paddle, it's going to make all these variables and put it into that bag. So these instance variables can be just x and y. They don't need to be named in such a way that we know which paddle they belong to, because we will know which paddle this belongs to because of the variable that we put them in. So the left paddle, the set of instance variables that are associated with the left paddle will be put into the left paddle bag, and the set of instance variables that belong to the right paddle will be in the right paddle bag. And then you could see here that we have this WN, which is underlined red, which is not good. And so since we're using it in our paddle class, then we should probably put it out here as a global variable. And this window height shouldn't change, so I'm going to put WNH and WNW in all caps. And I'm going to put white in all caps because white does not change value either. And all caps, remember, means that it's a constant and it's never going to change. We could see here that we have underlined gray, which means we need 2 lines between the class definition and the next line of code above it. So I'll do that. And our paddle height and paddle width are underlined red, so we need to make sure we're using the instance variables here. So we're going to say self paddle self width, and that should go away. Okay, great. So we can't really test right now because it's going to break our program, because we're still splitting the variables, the paddle 1 variable and paddle 2 variables, and we're still using x1 and x2 downstairs and in our algorithm. So we need to kind of finish all of this and run it all at once. So let's go ahead and try that. So I went ahead and replaced WN, so I'm going to make sure that I use my constants that I just created, width and height. And so what I took out was the creation of the paddle 1's instance variables. So something that needs to be clear is that sequential code, right? So the way that Pong was written before sequential code is exactly the same as object-oriented code, meaning that the instructions, each line of code, would be an instruction, each line of code or each instruction is run in the exact same order. It's just that when you use the object-oriented coding model, you're using a different methodology, right? So right here, we still need to create our paddle 1 variables. But to do it, we're going to do this, paddle underscore left, which is creating a variable called paddle left. And I'm going to set it equal to a paddle, right? And that's how I do it. How do I know that this is creating a paddle? Well, we have a capital letter, and capital letters are saved for the names of classes alone, right? So if you ever have a variable name that starts with a capital letter, that's not a variable name. You are calling the paddle class, right? You're calling a class. So what happens when I do this right here? Well, it's going to jump up to the paddle class, and it's going to run the init function automatically, which is also called the constructor. So I can put that here, constructor, because it constructs the object. And what is an object? It's just a set of variables. So we're going to create these variables and put them all into the variable called paddle left. Again, we could think of paddle left as being a bag that's going to save, that is going to be filled with all of these variables. Okay, so this paddle left bag contains an x variable, a y variable, a speed variable, a height, a width, and also the image for the paddle. And so here, I guess I don't want to call it paddle, I want to call it image. So let's call it image because it's going to contain the surface or the image of the paddle. So I want to also do the same thing here, right, for paddle 2. So the way that I'm going to do that, and actually I think this one is paddle right. Actually this is, yeah, paddle right. And how do I know it's paddle right? Because you can see here my x value is at 880, which is on the very far right side of the screen. I think I have these mixed up, right? So width is definitely longer than height, so I'm going to change that up. And okay, so I want to do the same thing for my second paddle as well, right? So my paddle on the left, so I'm going to say paddle underscore left is equal to capital paddle. And I could now go ahead and delete all of these because creating the paddle object is now creating another bag called paddle left, and it's putting all of these instance variables into it because those are the same instance variables that I have here in the defined in the paddle class. But you'll see that there's a slight error in the code, and what's the error is that my right paddle is going to be at this x and y position, but my left paddle, when I create it, is going to run the paddle class. It's going to jump up to the init function and run it, and it's going to create a paddle with the x and y also at the same location. So since x and y needs to be different for paddle 1 and paddle 2, what we need to do is take it in as arguments to the constructor. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and take in my xpos and my ypos. You can name these variables whatever you want. It doesn't matter, but xpos and ypos makes sense to me. And when I create my right paddle, I'm going to send it this variable value, right? This value that's going to change. And then for my y, I'm also going to send it this value. This is where I want the left paddle to appear, the right paddle to appear on the screen on the x-axis. This is where I want the y paddle to appear on the screen on the y-axis. And then the same thing is going to happen for my left paddle. I'm going to do that, comma, that. And your values here are probably different. But don't worry about it. The end result's basically the same. So I'm going to change this to my global variables because I erased the local ones. And now we're good, right? Except what's going to happen, we're going to run our code, it's going to create our paddle, and it's going to jump up to the constructor. Xpos is going to be equal to this number here. Ypos is going to be equal to this number here. Right? So we need to take those values that are coming into the constructor and set them equal to x and y. So I'm going to say xpos here. And I'm going to say equals to ypos here. Alright, great. So now when I create my right paddle, it's going to create all my instance variables, and my xpos and ypos are going to be where they should be because I passed them in as arguments. And then when I create my left paddle, we are going to put it in the right location because my x position is specified as the first argument, and the y position of this left paddle is specified here as the second argument. And so I guess I want them to be the same, so I'm going to change that to a 0.2 so that the y position is the same on both. And now we can go ahead and delete all of these variables that are associated with the left paddle because creating a paddle object does that for us. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. We'll leave the ball right here by itself because you'll go ahead and program that yourself once we finish this. So we scroll on down, and now we're looking for places where we are manipulating the paddle. Right? And so here we're just taking in keystrokes, so I can ignore that. And here we have the logic that is resetting the Y position and the X position of both the paddles. And if you look at it closely, you can see that the Y pos of the right paddle, Y1 and X1 are the right paddle, and then Y2 and X2 are the left paddle. So right here, this is logic for the left paddle, the right paddle, and this one here is also logic for the right paddle, and this one here. So I guess I can, first step would be to group them all together. So let's go ahead and group these guys all together. Whoa. So we'll do that, and we'll do that. So you can see here that this is manipulating the right paddle, and this is repositioning the left paddle. Okay, and if you look at it, you can see that the logic is exactly the same. The only thing that's different is we're using Y1, and over here we're using Y2. And also the only thing different here is we're using move up and move down that are associated with which keys are being pressed. And over here we're using move up one and move down one. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take this logic and we're going to move it up to the update method of the paddle. And so here, instead of y1, we're not going to use y1. We're going to be using self.y, which means the right paddle's y variable or instance variable. And now here I'm going to do self.y as well. All of these places I'm going to do self.y. So let me go ahead and just copy this. And I'm going to paste it there, 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 and there. The W and H, I replace it with the capital W and H. And then the paddle height, I'm going to replace it with my instance variable paddle height. So I say self.paddle height. And right over here, same thing, self.paddle height. And the speed is self.speed. And same thing here. Okay, so we're basically finished. Now our algorithm is using the instance variables of the class. And the only thing different now here is the move up and move down. Right? So when I call update, I'm going to be calling this method update downstairs in my game loop. And when I call it, my left paddle needs to use move up one and move down one. And my right paddle, when I call update, needs to use move up and move down. So this is going to be changing. It's going to be variable depending on which paddle object I'm going to be calling update on. So since that's the case, we need to take it in as arguments. So I'm going to say up, comma down. And here I'm going to replace that with up. And I'm going to place that with down. I'm going to replace this guy with up. And I'm going to replace this guy with down. All right. So then now the only thing that we need to do is when we call update downstairs in our game loop, we need to make sure we pass the right paddle object, the right variables that signify which keystrokes were being pressed. Namely, either move up, move down, or move up one, move down one. Okay. So we're going to come on down here, and this is for my right paddle. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and replace this with a call to update. So how does that work? Well, my right paddle is in paddle underscore right, and I'm going to say period update. So what does this mean? It means, okay, that bag of variables I have for my right paddle, I'm going to run update on those bag of variables. So I'm going to affect that the value of those variables. And update, remember, needs to have the move up and move down information. So up was first, so I'm going to say move up, and then I'm going to say move down. All right, now I can go ahead and I can delete this code because it's being run. How is it being run? Well, it's being run because right here I'm calling update and I'm passing move up and move down. That means the code's going to jump up here to the paddle class, It's going to run update. Up is going to be equal to move up. Down is going to be equal to move down. So it's going to say if move up or move down. If move up, y is equal to this new value. Y is equal to this new value, and so on. And if you analyze it, this is the same thing as this. Okay, I'm sorry. Running line 82 is doing the same thing as running line 83 to 91. So I can go ahead and delete that. And I'm going to do the same thing for my right paddle. So on my left paddle. So I'm going to say paddle underscore left period update, and I'm going to send it move up 1. Of course, these variables might be different, or most likely are different on your programs, but this is what I'm going to do. And then I can replace all of this. I can get rid of it. Right? So I'm going to delete that. All right, great. So let's come back upstairs. Yeah, everything looks good. And so I am now have one more step. This is the logic for the ball, and I'm going to let you do that on your own. And so the last step here, I want to replace this with capital white, is to blit to the screen, right? And so if you remember, blit takes in the surface as the first argument, and it takes in the x and y position as the second argument in a tuple. And a tuple just means it's in parentheses. So here I need to put the image for whichever paddle I'm using that I want to blit. And I guess we could start with paddle right. And if you remember up in the paddle class, our image is saved in a instance variable called image, right? And we know that because the pygame.surface method is going to return the surface of this height and this width, and we're going to save that surface here in image. And that's what blit needs. It needs the surface for the paddle. So I'm going to say paddle underscore right dot image. And then over here, I'm going to say paddle underscore right dot x. And here, I'm going to say paddle underscore right dot y. Okay. So now what are we saying here? We're saying, okay, use these instance variables that are in the bag called paddle right. And over here, we're going to do the same thing, right? We're going to say paddle underscore left dot image, comma, paddle underscore left dot x, comma, paddle underscore left dot y. All right. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and just comment out the ball being blitted onto the screen because we have a little bit of errored code here. So I'm just going to just delete all of this. Or I'm going to actually comment it all. So the way you comment multiple lines of code is you do 3 single quotes. So then the ball is out so I can run my program and test. Right? Because all I'm testing is that my paddle object is working correctly. And to reiterate, what do? We came up here to main. We replaced the creation of the paddle variables, the left paddle variables and the right paddle variables, with a call or a creation of a paddle object, and we moved those variables up here into the constructor, and we made our left paddle and we made our right paddle, which is the same as creating variables for my left paddle, variables for my right paddle. And then we came into our loop. We replaced the logic that reset the x and y variables of the paddle with a call to update. And we took the code that was here and we moved it up into the update method. But the update method required different information for the 2 different paddles. So that's why we placed that different information, the move up and move down variables, in as arguments to update. And those 2 calls did the same thing as the code that used to be here. The logic that adjusted the x and y position of the paddle. So again, everything is exactly the same as what it was before. We're just using a different methodology. And then the last step is to blit to the screen. But blitting to the screen, we need to use our paddle instance variables. So we say paddle right, instance variable image, which contains the surface, and the paddle x and the paddle y. And we did that for both of the left paddle and the right paddle. So when we run, everything should what we should see, since we commented out the ball, is we should see 2 paddles moving on the screen. So of course there's an error, so I'm going to click on this. Okay, so here's another ball error, but again I'm just going to go ahead and comment this out so we can see that our paddle is working correctly. While we're in the process of putting the ball together, I run it, and we got something going on here. So it's saying that move up 1 and move down 1 are not defined, I believe. So let's go ahead and define those. Move up 1 equals false. And of course I want to set it equal to false because I don't want the paddle to move when the game first starts. And paddle 1, and that should get everything going good. So now what do we got? We got 2 paddles that are able to move on the screen, and they're not using very regular variables now. We're using instance of the paddle class and the left paddles and right paddles instance variables to get this done. And this is halfway done to objectifying the Pong code. Now the next now try is to do the same process with the ball. So good luck with that.